Now, in order to safely jack up the rear end of my Jeep, I'm going to put jack stands in the jack points, one on each side. Be sure to block a tire in front so that your car does not roll at all. Let me show you where I am going to jack up the car. So I'm jacking it up by this cross member here. I have a piece of wood on my floor jack, and I'm making sure not to touch the differential or this piece in front here. It's just gonna lift the car by that cross member, and then I will quickly move the car jacks into place. Here you can see I have both jack stands in place, and the car is now resting on those jack points. I will leave the floor jack in place, although I have basically lowered it to the point where there's not much pressure on that cross member anymore. So the vehicle is stable and it's in a good position for me to work on the rear brakes. Using my air tool and a 22mm deep socket, I will remove all of the lug nuts from the rear tires. For this video, I will be changing the right rear brake, and you'll duplicate the process on the left side. First thing we're going to do is remove an anti-rattle clip. So you're going to put a flathead screwdriver kind of inside the brake like I am and just wiggle it so you can remove that. Save these clips in case your new brake pad kit does not have a set. Next, using a picking tool, I'm going to pop off the dust caps on those disc brake pins. There will be a dust cap on both the top and bottom disc brake pins, so remove both. Now, I do not have an electronic parking brake or EPB, but if you do, go into the Uconnect, get yourself to settings, and find the drop down where it says parking brake and turn that off. Now back to the brakes. With that top dust cap off, I'm now putting in a 7mm hex head socket, and I'm going to remove that top disc brake pin. Now I don't have enough room on that lower pin to use that 7mm hex head socket, so I'm just using an Allen wrench to get that lower pin out. Once you've freed the threads, you are just going to have to kind of work that thing out of the boot. And we are going to remove the top and bottom pins. Now your brake pads are probably going to be holding on to that rotor, so we are going to need to get a screwdriver in there just to push on that inside pad to push the piston in a little bit. And again, just use gentle pressure to push that piston in slightly. That's really all you need to do. Do this gently. All right, with that piston pushed in just a little bit, I can now pull that caliper off. And what you really can't see too well is that I've got an old coat hanger, and I hook it onto the spring, and then I know my elbow's in the way here, but what I'm doing is I'm just kind of fishing that wire, or you can use anything else. I'm wrapping it around the brake caliper, and then I'm hooking it onto the coil spring so that when I let go of my caliper, it's not hanging by the brake line. I just don't want to put any tension on that brake line and damage it. So what I'm doing here is I'm just messing with that hanger, getting it kind of pushed through some of the holes on the caliper so that my caliper is supported while I'm changing those brake pads. If at this point your brake pads haven't just fallen on the floor already, you can just pull those out. You really can't beat the prices on Amazon, so I picked up a pair of ceramic brake pads from Bosch. I'll put a link in the description along with some of the tools I'm using, but at this point we want to compare our new brake pads with our old brake pads before we go any further. Amazon does have a nice feature where they confirm fitment on your vehicle when you plug in your specifications. However, I'm a pretty visual guy, so I like to lay the brake pads out and compare the inside and outside just to make sure that they are the right match. And these are looking pretty good. Now the new brake pads will not fit in the caliper with the piston extended as far as it is, Simply, it has to push out further and further as your brake pads get thinner and thinner. So what I like to do is put one of my old brake pads back into the caliper, and then I get an old large C-clamp, and I'm just going to start slowly pushing that piston back in so that I make that gap wide enough that I can fit in my 2 new brake pads. With that piston pushed in, you can now start cleaning things up and getting ready to install your new brake pads. Now I'm going to start with a wire brush, and I'm going to clean all of the grooves where the brake pads sit. So any rust or grime or dirt that is kind of built up on the ridges where that brake pad goes, I'm just going to clean all that out. You'll see a lot of dust and red rust that's coming off, but honestly, this caliper and brake assembly isn't in too bad a shape. Next, just use a healthy amount of brake cleaner to blast all of that dust and grime out of there so that you've got a nice, clean, dust-free workspace. I like to blast off that rotor as well to make sure there's no grit left on it. And now I'm going to apply brake and caliper grease to the little tabs where I'm going to be resting my new brake pads. And I will apply a healthy amount of this caliper grease to both the top and bottom and the inside and outside tabs. Now I'm going to take the brake pad that rests on or inside that piston, and I'm just going to push that one into place. It's got that metal tab on it, so it's going to hold on to the inside of that piston. So it might take a little bit of gentle pressure just to kind of snap it in place. Now, as long as you've pushed your piston far enough in, you can now put on the other brake pad into the assembly and then slide everything over the rotor. Now you're just going to kind of wiggle things back into their proper position. Now we are in the home stretch. You're going to slide in those disc brake pins. And again, the bottom one, I couldn't get my 7mm hex socket on there, so I am tightening it by hand with a 7mm Allen key. I am just going to tighten these snug, but the torque setting is between 11 and 15 foot-pounds if you have a wrench small enough to weasel in there. Now, as before, I am able to use my socket wrench and that 7mm hex socket to tighten the upper pin, but again, I'm just going to go snug because it is about 10 to 15 foot-pounds is what you want to set that at. And we are close to being done. But first, don't forget to put those plastic dust caps back on place. They are just going to pop on with a little bit of pressure. Next, we are going to put the anti-rattle clip in place. And this little bugger can be kind of a pain in the butt, but what I like to do is get one top side installed. You can see the little tab that goes in the hole. Then I'm going to use a screwdriver, and while holding it with my left hand, I'm just going to push that metal the little couple of centimeters that it has to go to grab onto the bottom groove. It may pop off a few times while you're trying to do this, but eventually you'll get that thing snapped in place. Once you've got it where you need it to be, you may see that it's standing out a little bit, so I use the back end of the screwdriver just to tap it down and make sure it's flush with that caliper. We are ready to put the wheel back on and tighten those lug nuts. Again, I'm using my air tool and a 22mm deep socket. And you will notice I am going around the wheel in a star pattern as I tighten those lug nuts because I do want to make sure that the tire is mounted flush. Once the Jeep is off the jack stands and the wheels are on the ground, I like to tighten the lug nuts to about 110 foot-pounds of torque. I think the torque setting is between 110 and 130 foot-pounds for the 2019 Jeep Grand Cherokee. Now, before I let my daughter drive this car, I did hop in it on Saturday morning because I did remember I didn't pump the brakes. So I'm going to start the car, And then what I'm going to do is, since I did push those pistons out on the rear brakes, I'm just going to gently pump the brakes, and what that's going to do is it's going to push that piston out so that it makes contact with those brake pads. If you don't do this the first couple of times you use your brakes, it's going to feel like you actually don't have any brakes because there's so much of a gap between your brake pads and that piston. Thanks for watching. Check out the description for more information and hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see more videos.